Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation, Building Equity into Climate Action. I hope you enjoyed the brief video. I'm Luis Sanchez, CEO of Community Resource Project, a local nonprofit, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And thank you for joining us. I'd like to acknowledge that this presentation is made possible by the collaborative commitment of time and energy from the following organizations: Community Resource Project, 350 Sacramento, Sierra Club Sacramento Group, Environmental Council of Sacramento, and the Citizens Climate Lobby Sacramento. Thank you all for participating and helping this. I want to give you some event logistics. Basically, we are streaming this and recording it on YouTube channel. You can, if you have comments or questions, you can submit those live on YouTube during the event. Just make sure that you're logged into your Gmail account and also your YouTube account. If you're watching on the desktop or laptop, you may want to make comments live. Just make sure you're logged into those the YouTube on your web browser through Gmail or YouTube. And then if you're watching on a smartphone or tablet, you may want to comment live. Also, make sure you're logged into your YouTube application. So enough with those. Today, you're going to be learning about how you can become engaged with the Sacramento County Climate Action Plan, which addresses climate change and how it's impacting everybody. We see the impact that increased fires across the region have on our air quality and the health impact on many. We feel the impact on climate change by the number of days we experience extreme heat events during summer and higher than normal drought periods because of less rainfall. And most importantly, we know that these impacts affect our communities of color who really lack the infrastructure, the community resources, and investments that can address these negative impacts. The CAP stakeholders are engaged to assist the county with its planning process to elevate awareness and discussion to ensure that we can address the environmental justice for everyone. So again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Let me introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Sukanek, Tom Sukanek, a marine ecologist and a climate change educator who will share the science, the impacts, and politics and solutions. So Dr. Sukanek has spent the last 40 years conducting research around the globe, primarily on environmental contaminants. For the past 20 of those years, he has been focusing on one of the greatest threats to human civilization, climate change, caused by the most critical pollutants of all time, carbon dioxide or CO2. Tom has earned his PhD from the University of Washington in Seattle and has had a diverse career. First, conducting research and teaching at UC Davis for 20 years. Second, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Sacramento as a director of Environmental Contaminants Division. And third, with the U.S. Geological Survey, also in Sacramento as the lead scientist and research manager. He has spent 7 years as a Western Regional Director for National Institute for Global Environmental Change for the Department of Energy. Dr. Sukanek, welcome.
Thank you, Luis. I appreciate the introduction. Very pleased to be here to help you folks understand some of the environmental issues, and especially associated with climate change, that will be important to really help in developing the climate action plan for Sacramento County. So before too long here, I will start sharing my screen and we can get into the presentation. All right. Can you folks see that now? I assume yes.
Yep, just go full screen.
All right, perfect. All right, thanks very much. I really want people to understand some of the environmental issues at stake here, both on a local level and also on a global level, because we can't separate the two. They're both really important. Before I do that, I'm going to move on to making a comment on the fact that I've been working on environmental contaminants for 40 years or so. I've worked on pesticides such as DDC, thermal pollution from power plants, oil pollution from super tanker groundings, mercury contamination from Clear Lake of its mercury mine, and radioactivity from the Farallon Islands nuclear waste dump site. But today, I'm going to focus on climate change, primarily focusing on the influence of CO2. So without further ado, I will now pull up a pointer here. There we go. So this slide here pretty much epitomizes what my presentation is going to do for everyone. And so basically we have these three waves coming in, and we have COVID here right now on a time scale of about 1 to 2 years. Hopefully we've got the vaccines coming in quickly here within the next few months, hopefully, or the next year till we get it. On top of that, sort of overtopping the COVID, we have economic instability with a recession. That's probably going to be with us for the time frame of about 2 to 4 years. And overtopping that on the long term, short term and long term, we have climate change affecting us. Both now, because we're experiencing those impacts from climate change, and that'll go on forever if we don't deal with it properly. So I'd like to start off with first getting everyone on the same page. I know many of you have seen this before or know about this, the greenhouse effect, but I'm wanting to make sure we all understand what's happening in this process. So on the left, we have the natural greenhouse effect. On the right, we have the human enhanced greenhouse effect. And basically what's happening here with the natural greenhouse effect is that the sun beats down on the earth absorbs some of that heat, but the rest of it is reflected back out into space. Some of it is trapped by this orange cloud here with greenhouse gases. We have three main gases that we'll be discussing today: carbon dioxide, CO2, nitrous oxide, N2O, and CH4, which is methane. Now, if we didn't have these gases and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, our entire planet would be ice. So we need them to a certain extent, but we don't need too much of them. So let's go over to the human enhanced greenhouse effect, and just the same process. We have the sun beating down on the earth, absorbing some of that heat, and the rest of it, again, same thing, escapes back into space. However, you see that this orange cloud is larger. We have created and produced and emitted into the atmosphere more carbon dioxide, more methane, and more nitrous oxide. So let's take a look at what that means in the big picture here. So let's talk about the three main greenhouse gases. So first, carbon dioxide is the primary greenhouse gas that we're dealing with. It's about 83% of our greenhouse gases. And basically, carbon dioxide is produced and is sourced from burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. From gasoline and burning those fuels in our engines and cars, trucks, buses, trains, from industrial manufacturing plants, from residential heating and cooling, from cement production, that's a longer story, and actually the decomposition of organic matter. So the next one we have is methane, which entails about 9% of our greenhouse gases. And methane, CH4, is derived from cattle burping or pooping. Most people think it's from the cow farts, but it's not really. 95% of it is from cattle burping. And cattle on the earth comprise about 2 to 3% of all of our greenhouse gases. So it's very important. It also comes from oil and gas drilling and fracking operations and landfills and waste. So that's basically where methane is coming from. We also have nitrous oxide, which is about 3% of our greenhouse gases. And nitrous oxide comes from agricultural soil management in the form of fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers, animal waste fertilizers, and human wastewater treatment plants. So that's the basics of where these greenhouse gases are coming from. Let's go further on to take a look at where they're coming from in Sacramento County. So basically, off-road and on-road vehicles comprise about 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. That means they're emitting into the atmosphere. So right here, 39, almost 40%. And also residential energy usage comprises about 25%. So we're getting some of our emissions from transportation, some from residential facilities, and commercial facilities as well, in terms of power plants, as well as production from manufacturing plants. Let's go a little further here. Where do these things come from? So here we have a graph on the left that is the amount of carbon dioxide being emitted into the atmosphere, emitted, meaning emissions, up to like 35 billion tons per year. That's not something to sneeze at. On the bottom, we have a timeline starting in the 1700s, all the way up to the present day, virtually. And we also have the Industrial Revolution, about the mid 1700s and the early 1800s. So the first thing we did when we started the Industrial Revolution was to start burning coal. And that continued on until, actually present day. So when we burned coal, we get carbon dioxide from that. But coal is coming from, in terms of a power source, we only have one coal-fired plant left in California. It comprises less than 0.2% of our net energy produced. However, coal is being exported from the US to primarily China and India, where they are burning it for heating and for fuel. Now, we're slowly getting rid of coal, but it's still there. So back in the 1920s and 30s, we started burning oil. Now, oil involves, the oil and gasoline, burning gasoline in your car, the oil for your engine. It is comprising the manufacture of tires, asphalts, pesticides, all kinds of things, and plastics. So this has increased over time, and it comprises about 33% of our emissions to the atmosphere. And then finally, we started burning gas, natural gas around the 1960s, and that continues on today. That comprises about 19% of our greenhouse gases. And this is burned in your oven, your stove, your hot water heater, all those kinds of things is natural gas. And again, there's some component, about 6% of our emissions come from cement production. I'm not going to go into that. So anyway, we end up with about 100 million tons of carbon dioxide per day, ending up with about 40 billion tons per year. And that's pretty amazing for a gas because it doesn't have much weight or mass. And you can't smell it, taste it, feel it, anything else, but it's there and it's ubiquitous. So we need to deal with this 40 billion tons per year of carbon dioxide and do something with it. And that's where we're getting our global warming, is from that CO2. So I'm going to show you this graph, which is basically the concentration of CO2 in our atmosphere. And that's been increasing over time. Basically, this is the last 1,000 years down here, 1,000 years ago. And the concentration of carbon dioxide during that 1,000 years has pretty much been around 280 parts per million. And I'm just going to focus on this, ignore that other graph. So it's been bumping along here the last 1,000 years until, here's our friend again, the Industrial Revolution, where we started burning fossil fuels. As soon as we did that, started producing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it started going up in this exponential climb up to way up here to about 415 parts per million, which is where we are about now. And that's our problem. We need to deal with this exponential increase of carbon dioxide and figure out how to solve the problems of the impacts that that creates. So what are some of the impacts that we experience? Well, we can't talk about the local impacts without talking about the global impacts. And I'm going to refer back and forth between what's happening globally and what's happening locally, so that we all understand that this is not a local issue only. This is also a global issue, and we need to work at the local and the global issues. So what are the impacts? We are experiencing extreme temperature fluctuations, and I'm going to cover many of these issues in a few minutes. Extreme weather conditions, storms, winds, tornadoes, floods. We also have extreme snowpack fluctuations. We get these what are called whiplash events, where one year we have, 17 feet of snow, and the next year we have no snow. It varies dramatically between years, and that's called whiplash. On the other end of the spectrum, between all the storms and the ice that we get, we also have extreme droughts. And the droughts will dry everything out, everything turns to tinder. With a lightning strike, we get extreme fires, and with that, we get dangerous air quality. And we also have extreme sea level rises happening. And you wouldn't think that's a problem here in Sacramento, but certainly is on the coast. But if the sea level rises, it's going to back up through the Sacramento River and into the Delta. And we could even get flooding in downtown Sacramento if that happened. We have increasing extinction rates. We're losing about 200 species a day. And that includes not only animals like the songbirds in your backyard, but it also includes the pollinators that we depend on in California for all the fruits and vegetables that we produce for the rest of the country and the world for that matter. And we have increasing human health risks, mortality of humans. The World Health Organization estimates that there's about 150,000 climate change related deaths per year right now, per year. And it also estimates that between 2030 and 2050, we will experience 250,000 climate change related deaths per year. So this is a serious thing and we need to deal with it. And well, basically we're experiencing these extreme and unpredictable events. And this is not happening in the future. This is happening right now, daily. You go into any news station, anywhere, no matter what you're looking at, and you're going to see these extreme events that are facing us every single day. So let's start out with a couple of examples, not many, but a few, just talking about storms and flooding in the country. This has been the worst flooding year in over a century. The Arkansas River, the Missouri River, Mississippi River, all were, more than the entire last century. And the rest of the country is flooding from other issues as well. So we also are experiencing atmospheric rivers. These are basically rivers of moisture in the sky. So here's here's the San Francisco Bay Area here. This is an atmospheric river coming across the Pacific, about 250 miles wide, about 1 mile high, and it just slams into the California coast and goes up over the mountains. So basically, this is the Pineapple Express that the weather forecasters on TV refer to. The Pineapple Express is basically nothing but an atmospheric river that we're experiencing. So to give you a sense of this, I'm going to pull up one example of a video of an atmospheric river. They start off in the tropics. Here's Hawaii. That's why they call it the Pineapple Express. And those moisture rivers come flying across the Pacific and slam into California. One example is that this superstorm that created this atmospheric river dumped 26 inches of rain in California and 17 feet of snow in the Sierra Nevada in 2010. And we get these periodically since then. This is the only video that I could find that actually showed what it's like. So be aware that these atmospheric rivers are really very dangerous when they come in, cause a huge amount of flooding, and we have to deal with that as well. So let's take a look at this temperature issue. This is a graph of the 10 hottest years on record globally. And we're trying to keep the temperature increasing below 1.25 or 2 degrees centigrade from the time that the Industrial Revolution started. So we're working on this, but we're not being very successful right now. Right now, this is the 10 hottest years on record, and this is the last 6. The last 6 years were the hottest years in this sequence. Now, 2019 was the hottest year ever. Not the hottest year ever, but it was last year, the closest time to what we are now. And the year 2020, where we are now, January through June months of this year, we're so far registering the second hottest year in the entire 140-year recorded record of temperatures on the Earth. So we're getting worse and worse, faster and faster. And that's causing, in California at least, that's causing rolling blackouts, which affects all of us throughout California. So let's take a look at what else the temperature is doing. It's drying things out. This is the Palmer Hydrological Drought Index. And you can see that the darker the color, the worse the drought. And you can see in the western part of the country, we're experiencing the worst droughts of anywhere in the US. Let's take a closer look at California. Here we have different levels of severe drought. We have abnormally dry, and then moderate drought, severe drought, extreme drought. And unfortunately, up until 2017, we didn't have a metric that could actually describe the amount of the level of drought we had in this level of California until that time. So they had to create a brand new color and a brand new metric to describe the intensity of this drought. So it's getting worse, so worse that we have to change our metrics. And that's affecting human health, It's affecting farm products for the production of our vegetables and fruit crops, and ecosystem damages as well that I mentioned earlier. So this is a graph from 1970s on through the present time. And this is the number of fires greater than 1,000 acres in US Forest Service land. And you can see it bounces back and forth, up and down, but it is getting larger numbers. And this orange line is the average of those numbers of fires going up and up and up to the present time. So it's getting worse and worse. And in fact, California's fire season, has increased by 75 days across the Sierra Nevada. So it's going earlier and it's going later. So pretty soon we may be into an all year round fire season. Now we talked about the numbers of fires. Let's talk about the acreage that's burned. So in September, firefighters were trying to fight 5 of the 6 largest fires ever in California in recorded history in September. And we had a total in 2020 so far, as of October 11th, we had over 8,000 fires in California, all the fires that were recorded. So here's the acreage burned. Now here's all the other previous records years, 2007, 17, 8, 2018, 2020 overwhelms all of those years in terms of acreage burned. Now that's just from the CAL FIRE data. If we add to that the US Forest Service data, we get even more. So over 4 million acres were burned this year, even as of October 11th. So we're getting worse and worse with the fires as well. Well, how much of this is due to climate change? So scientists have been studying this for a long time, ever since climate change became a real serious issue. And since the 1980s, the proportion of the influence from the different factors, including climate change, has gotten greater and greater and greater. With respect to wildfires, it's now influencing about 50% of the wildfires that occur. So it's getting worse and worse in that respect as well. So here's a map. Here's a map of Sacramento County. And here's a map of Sacramento County, basically the same map, except this map has air quality indexes overlain on top of it. So we have various indices, unhealthy, very unhealthy, hazardous, which are basically down here as well. And the red color is unhealthy air. The purple color up here is very unhealthy air. And this brownish blob up here is hazardous to needing immediate action. And this is from September 12th of this year, a couple months ago. And this, as you well know, you were here undoubtedly, unless you're coming in from someplace else. This wafted over back and forth over Sacramento, where we had to keep our windows closed. It was unhealthy to go out biking and exercising. So this air quality index shows how vulnerable we are to the processes that I just described in terms of these fires that are affecting us. And then we have the other bugaboo. We have the other crisis that we're dealing with, COVID. This is just this last week, COVID-19 spread. These are the uncontrolled spread, the states that have uncontrolled COVID in them. And this is getting worse now by the day, by the week. And you all know this, every news report that comes out, you can see what's happening. So here we are with the COVID increase. This is daily increases. So here we are, started in March, went up, and then we started enforcing some operations, mask wearing and social distancing, and then people got lazy. And then it started going up again in July and August with the summer being out in the beaches. And then we started breaking down again, or closing up operations. And then sort of at the end of September, October, people started picking up again and doing outside things and going to bars and restaurants and gyms, and it started getting way out of hand. So right now, we are at 181,000 cases a day. This is just this last week. But the people who are studying this, scientists who are studying this, believe that it's more likely 300,000 to 400,000 cases a day. And that's resulting in, so far, 248,000 plus deaths in the United States. So this is affecting our community. It's just another crisis that we need to deal with on top of the climate change. So we have this, these issues where now we're starting to go up onto this exponential growth curve again, straight up, almost straight up, just like carbon dioxide is going. So let's take a look at the curve. You've all seen this curve where we have to bend the curve to stop the spread of COVID. So here's the exponential curve going up and up and up, steep, steep. But if we can enforce some of those regulations, we can bend that curve down and stop it and get down to the 0 point where we get rid of the virus. This shaped curve is exactly the same thing that's happening with climate change and carbon dioxide. So let's take a look. Here's that curve again. This curve is going up, up, up. This is actually a carbon dioxide curve of the emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Here's that 40 billion tons a year that I was talking about. So across the bottom, starting in 1980, going across to the year 2100, here we are in the year 2000, here we are in the year 2020. So far, we have not slowed down the emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We keep growing and growing, almost going up to an exponential curve. What would happen if we didn't do anything right now to stem the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? What would happen if we did nothing? That carbon dioxide would keep going up at an exponential pace to a point where we might reach a point of no return, called a tipping point. We don't know if we're at that tipping point yet, but we still have to figure out how to stop before we get there. That means that whatever we do, we can't return to the condition we were at previously. So we need to do something. So let's go back to that graph. So here we are, we're in the year 2020 right here. We were at the year 2000 before. If we had started reducing the amount of carbon dioxide we were releasing into the atmosphere, this curve like the COVID curve, we would have to bring it down. So this yellow line, these are all mathematical projections of what we would have to do if we wanted to stop carbon dioxide instead of COVID. So this yellow line comes down here. And if we wanted to stop it, we would have had to reduce our carbon dioxide output by about 2% per year. That's that curve right there. Obviously, we didn't do that. So here's the curve after 2000. Here we are 2020. Now, here's 2020. This is that red line coming down. If we could bend that curve down, we would get down to here, but we'd have to start increasing our removal of carbon dioxide by 5% per year. Well, we'll see if that happens. Right now, each one of those little dots up there is another year. So 10 dots, we're at 2030 here. So if we don't do anything, if we just sort of stay where we are now and only start taking carbon dioxide, removing carbon dioxide from our emissions, by 2030, if we just started then, we would have to decrease our emissions by 9% per year, even steeper. This is a really huge challenge because we'd have to get all the countries of the world to be participating in this as well. So this is almost unbelievably difficult. So we don't really have till 2100. We have maybe 10 years, maybe 12 years. We need to start bending this curve down just like COVID right away, just immediately, as much as we can possibly do, both locally and globally. So Sacramento County needs to help in this as well. So what are some of the solutions that we have to solve this problem? Well, back in 2015, President Obama led the entire globe in 196 countries together to sign the Paris Climate Agreement. And they agreed in 2016, they ratified this agreement and are now starting to operate on that. Many of the countries are. In addition to that, we also have some other good news. Nearly 1,500 governments around the world, that could be countries, states, municipalities, cities, they're now declaring climate emergencies, which allows them to develop legislation and start solving some of these problems. And in addition, over 6,000 companies and 7,000 cities in 133 countries are implementing greenhouse gas emission reduction actions and following the Paris Climate Agreement protocols. So we have hope here. And do we just need another good world leader to step in? The United States is the most powerful country on earth. And we need to have another person who's going to really move that forward and get these countries back in line and start doing that. The United States is not in one now, right now, because Trump pulled us out of the climate accord. However, there's the new administration has a tremendous plan. There's a New York Times article today that you should look at because it identifies what the Biden administration is going to do in every single one of the cabinet positions, and every single agency will have identified priorities for dealing with climate change. So you should read this article today. So transportation, remember I said California has 40% of its emissions are coming from transportation. Around the US, it's only 30%. And globally, it's only 14%. So California, because we have so many cars, is even more critical than the other places in the US. However, these countries here in this list are already making announcements that they will ban gasoline engines in new vehicles by these dates, 2050, 2040, 2030, 25. So they are already doing that. You notice also that the United States is not among this list. We need to be, and we need to be quickly. And we can do that locally starting as well. Governor Newsom already started that. He introduced an executive order in September of this year that halts the sales of all new gasoline engines, cars and trucks in California by the year 2035. That's a great start, and we need to continue along that. Sacramento County can also do things like upgrade the county fleet vehicles. They can subsidize and promote more public transportation. They can subsidize low emission vehicles, ride and bike share programs, and more charging stations for electric vehicles, among a few of the examples of things that they could do. So we also have what's called the built environment, buildings and grounds. So what can we do there? We can go to residential and commercial buildings. We have to find some way of using alternative and renewable energy sources, like I've talked about. Solar and wind and hydroelectric are the three main ones that we can use. We also need to start using better insulation in the attics, floors, basements, and use double and triple pane windows. These are all things we can do locally that will make a significant difference, that will contribute to the problem that we have that's global. Also, also the green spaces. If we plant more trees and vegetation along roads and buildings, we can lower CO2, but because the trees are absorbing the carbon dioxide, and also reduce what's called the heat island effect that occurs in cities where you don't have much vegetation and it's just the sun reflecting off of open space. So photovoltaics, solar is our best option here for reducing our greenhouse gases from fossil fuels. Since 1970s, it's gone down 99%, and the cost of solar is continuing to go down continuously. Excuse me. So California came out with a mandate. The California Energy Commission mandated in 2018 that by this year, January 1st of this year, every new construction residential home should have solar built into it. There's also the California Energy Commission also specified under certain conditions that people could opt to join a SMUD program that was using solar energy as the source of the electricity for a particular home. So people could opt out for that as well. And we can use these not only for residential single family homes, but also for multifamily complexes. So we can have solar there that's going to really improve our ability to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. The second big one is wind. So that right now provides 4.3% of the world's energy, and in California, even more, 7.2%. So we're doing pretty well there. We need to do better. And this is down in San Gorgonio Pass in Palm Springs, but you're probably more familiar with Altamont Pass going over the rise on Route 50 into Livermore. That's the oldest and largest wind turbine farm in the world. So in addition to lowering our emissions, the stuff that's going up into the atmosphere, we also need to take what's in the atmosphere out of the atmosphere already. So what's in there is carbon dioxide. That's the big bugaboo that we're dealing with. Unfortunately, once carbon dioxide gets into the atmosphere, this is the problem. It's going to be there for 500 to 1,000 years. So every bit we put into there, we don't have 500 to 1,000 years to solve this problem. We need to solve it now. So in addition to lowering our emissions, we also need to take it out of the air. So this is just a little video that shows smoke going back into a smokestack. It's much like this, taking carbon dioxide and not pumping it back into the smokestack, but actually removing it from the atmosphere. So that's called active CO2 removal. And that's represented by this company here, Global Thermostat, which is using solids to absorb CO2 out of the air in different prototype facilities. This is one of them in Menlo Park. Here's another one, looks very different in Huntsville, Alabama. And basically they are removing carbon dioxide out of the ambient air and changing it, okay, making it inert, so it's not affecting our atmospheric conditions. So basically that's one of them. And there's several more. There's about 7 different companies around the world that are doing this. So we may get there. They're very expensive to run. They cost a lot of electricity. But if we can use more solar and more wind as our energy sources, more and more, we could then start powering these facilities to then take out carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere directly. So that's direct air capture. And here's a passive air capture. So this is Sacramento Farm Bureau. UC Davis is involved in what's called a sequestration program for soils. They're enhancing soils. They're amending the soils with different types of minerals that actually absorb carbon dioxide out of the air, not the plants, but the soils. So they're working on this. They've been working on this for years now. And they think that they can take 4 to 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide out of the air and sequester it back into the soils. So we can do this work with our farmers as well. So there's active and passive removal. We need to be taking it out of the atmosphere as well. So we also need to be able to develop battery storage. So here's a facility, because once we get the energy from solar or wind, we can do that when the sun's shining and the wind's blowing, but we need to be able to store energy so we can use it when the sun isn't shining and the winds aren't blowing. So here's a solar photovoltaic solar field, grid scale for the community scale in Australia, in southern Australia. And here is a battery plant, a regional or what we call grid scale battery plant built by Tesla, the first and biggest battery storage project in the world. And there's these 7 companies actually are all working on grid scale or regional battery storage facilities. Can SMUD do one of these? Not sure, but it's worth talking about anyway. So coming to a close here, basically, in terms of dealing with climate change, number 1, we have to lower the carbon emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere, reduce and eliminate our use of fossil fuels, develop alternative energy supplies, solar, wind, hydro. We need to electrify everything. We need to develop home and grid scale or community battery systems. And then in addition to lowering our emissions, we need to be taking the CO2 out of the atmosphere, lowering CO2 reduction facilities with direct air capture, and the passive removal, like carbon farming in the soils. And finally, we need to develop and support legislation, local, state, and federal support, and we need to develop these action plans. So we need to use all of the tools in our toolbox. And here we are back again with our diagram. COVID will be with us for 1 to 2 years. Recession will be with us for 2 to 4 years. Climate change will be with us forever unless we deal with it. And I think we need to take action immediately. So what can you do as individuals? I have on my website 50 things that you can do personally to help solve the climate crisis. And if you go to tomsakonic.net, my website, look at the 50 things you can do page, and you'll see what you can do individually and why. And there also on my website is a 12-week climate change course that Dana Nucitelli and I developed a couple of years ago. It's all there. It's about 12 weeks worth. So with that, I think I'm going to say this is bigger than Sacramento County. Obviously, it's global, but we need to contribute. And we all have to do our part. If you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And I think that's it. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Saconic, for sharing this important information. It's quite alarming to know what the impacts are that could develop years on. So we'll make sure that we can share the information that you have from when we send out other. Now, I want to introduce our next presenter, which is Michelle Manning. She's a member of the Climate Action Plan Stakeholders Group, and she's representing the environmental justice community. And she'll be covering what does the CAP mean to me. Welcome, Michelle.
Hello. So let me just share my screen really quickly. Alrighty, guys. So I'm here to cover what a CAP or climate action plan is. Sorry, give me just one moment. There you are. And then why is it important to the health of your community? So first of all, for a definition, we're going to look to the Institution for Local Government. A CAP is a comprehensive roadmap that outlines the specific activities that an agency will undertake to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So what goes into a CAP? In short, that really depends on state law. Bills like SB 32 set greenhouse gas emissions targets, which local governments will then have to meet. Additionally, because California wants to be carbon neutral by 2045, passing climate action plans is going to be essential to meeting that goal. And so with these emissions goals in mind, the first thing that goes into a CAP is a greenhouse gas inventory. Essentially, you need to know what you have to know how much you need to reduce emissions to reach your goal. You know, what's that gap from point A to point B? And so we've talked about the why. Let's talk about how. How does a county go about reducing emissions? A number of ways. You can introduce new eco-friendly practices, or you can regulate the way projects are done currently and in the future, like transportation or housing. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Enforceability. In the case of Sacramento County, our CAP, you might have guessed it, it'll be Sacramento County enforcing it. They're going to have to monitor and enforce these activities in order to make sure that emissions reductions are on track. And if they aren't, the CAP will then have to be adjusted. If the emissions aren't on track, I mean. And so why is any of this important to your community? Well, you know, we discuss some of the causes and consequences of the climate crisis with Tom. You know, things like summers getting hotter, more bad air days, wildfires. But it gets worse for certain people in our communities, including our low income communities and our communities of color, which also typically overlap if you're looking at a map of Sacramento County. The effects hit harder for these groups. Why is that? There's a number of reasons. Simplifying things somewhat. Baseline health is worse due to inadequate housing, poor medical access, pollution. Public infrastructure is less well developed and less well maintained. And a lot of these citizens in these communities work outdoors, exposing them to the effects of the consequences of the climate crisis. They also lack a financial cushion to escape these consequences, to escape the heat and to pull through natural disasters. And then finally, systems that perpetuate racial and economic inequities also resist changes to the status quo, and that's going to include climate action as well. So what do we want to see in this climate action plan? There are typical things that you often find in CAPs, like electric public transportation or car share programs, urban greening, which is planting shade trees and green landscaping. We talked about a little bit of that with Tom. The idea there is to lower temperatures at a street level, updating old homes to be eco-friendly, requiring all electric energy efficient new housing, and building new housing near business centers and transportation corridors. But we also really want to see neighborhood investment in our marginalized communities, as these are areas that have been very much underserved in the past. What does neighborhood investment look like? It's going to look a lot like that list I had before of what you typically see. It's going to be expanded transit, streets that are bicycle, pedestrian, and disability friendly with shade trees planted so that everybody can use these streets and not just people who have cars. It's going to be building homes near existing work, schools, stores, and transit so that you don't have to drive 20 minutes to your nearest grocery store, or you don't have to leave work early to make your kids pick up time for their school. And it's going to be insulating and electrifying older homes to lower costs for residents of these areas. And most importantly, in my opinion, it's going to also include anti-displacement policies, because what is the point of investing in a neighborhood if it forces the current residents out with rent raises and gentrification? And so what can you do? You can make yourself heard. And for more on that, we'll be hearing from Luis Sanchez and then our city and county representatives.
Thank you, Michelle, for that insightful information. I think it's important that we all stay engaged and, look at those items that you suggested and consider them, especially making sure that we don't gentrify communities. That's very important. So next, I want to introduce Todd Smith, a principal planner with Sacramento County Planning and Environmental Review. So welcome, Todd.
Thank you, Luis, for having me on today. I want to thank also every member of each of these organizations that did the heavy lift to get this organized and put together this presentation and multiple presentations, rather, for the benefit of the audience today. I do want to just briefly touch on the county's climate action plan process to let everybody know how to be engaged in it and how to stay up to date with what's going on. So our community-wide climate action plan is what we're working on currently. It is, let me share my screen real quick. It is what we call the Phase 2B climate action plan, or hopefully the final step in a complete climate action plan for unincorporated Sacramento County. And when I say complete, I want to recognize the work that's already been done with respect to the Phase 1 strategy and framework climate action plan from 2011 and the Phase 2A, or government operations climate action plan, from 2012. And so what we're working on now, again, is a community-wide climate action plan. We started this work in 2016. We did a significant amount of outreach in that year and through 2018 to a number of interest groups, including 350 Sacramento, Eco Sierra Club, realtors, apartment owners, business interests in the development community. And one of the things that we learned was that we needed to have something that was aggressive in the climate action plan as far as targets go to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. If you think back to Tom's curves on that one chart, we need to get aggressive now because it hasn't been done yet. So we are going for an all-electric strategy for new development. That's one of the things that Michelle mentioned in her presentation. We have partnered with SMUD through our focus stakeholder process that includes a lot of the folks who are behind the scenes working through the focus stakeholder process to develop this CAP, including all those who did the work that organized this today. The other thing that's really important to us is equity in this climate action plan. And that came out of a number of things, one of which is our environmental justice element that the board adopted last year. It's got a policy in there that really speaks to the programs that come out of the climate action plan and prioritizing any investments, whether it's electric vehicle charging facilities, transit, or multimodal transportation, or weatherization programs, energy efficiency programs, those sorts of things that may come out of this climate action plan. Prioritizing those investments in the county's environmental justice communities or disadvantaged communities. And so what we're looking for as far as one of the pieces that we want to hear from folks about is what are some specific needs in our environmental justice communities related to these issues. And if you go on our website, you can, up here at the top, there's a link where you can subscribe as far as receiving updates. This is how to do it. You can subscribe to get email or text updates if you're interested in that. You can also contact us at this email, climateactionplan@saccounty.net. A number of us have that email inbox on our desktops. We check it regularly. And then you can also take a look at the prior work that's been done, the Phase 1 Climate Action Plan, Phase 2A Climate Action Plan, as well as our vulnerability assessment. Some of those things that Tom was talking about as far as the immediate effects that are going on now. Some of those, in fact, most of those are highlighted in this climate change vulnerability assessment down here under project documents. You can also access the emissions inventory. Michelle touched on that. As far as process goes, we're in the middle of developing a draft climate action plan. We are anticipating having it out for a public review towards the end of December. And if you subscribe to that list up at the top of the page, you'll be notified when it comes out, and you'll have an opportunity to provide feedback on that to make sure that it meets your expectations. The other way to be involved is connecting with the elected officials. This is a plan in process. Ultimately, it will need to be adopted by the Board of Supervisors. So I think one of the ways that can be folks can be engaged is not just talking to staff, but letting the elected officials know that this is important to you. And finally, if you have any questions or want to talk offline, I don't know that I gave my contact information, but I will make sure that that's available. I think it might be on our website as well. Let me take a look real quick. If it's not, I'll make sure it gets sent out in any after action transmittal that goes out from this group. So thank you, Luis, for the opportunity to share what's going on.
Thank you, Todd. I want to remind people that if you have any questions to enter through the chat, and so that way we'll have a section a little later on for answering those questions you might have. The next presenter is Jennifer Venema, who is the Sustainability Manager and Interim Climate Action Lead with the City of Sacramento. Sacramento also is involved with this, so we're glad that we could include the City of Sacramento in this presentation. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Luis and SAC 350 for having us. I know we have so much good content to cover today, so we've got 6 minutes. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Unfortunately, I will be having to hop off at about 1 o'clock here for the scheduled time, but you've got a lot of good information. So what I'm going to do is provide a whirlwind of what we're doing at the City of Sacramento. So I am here, as Luis noted, I'm serving through the city manager's office to help coordinate and strategize at a high level how the city is achieving our climate targets. Now, I'm also accompanied by my amazing colleagues from the Community Development Department that are actually leading and managing some of these projects that we'll be touching on today. So you've heard a lot about the climate challenge, and we've seen a lot of great data and daunting information about why it's such a big and unprecedented crisis. Many folks that are listening here probably participated over the last nearly 2 years. The mayors of Sacramento and West Sacramento convened the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change to look at the problem and advise how we move forward. You can see with these illustrative icons on your screen that the effort touched on so many topics and really focused on what the city needs to do to achieve carbon neutrality, both of the cities, with the intent that this would serve as a model for the region more broadly. This brought together many stakeholders, from environmental justice advocates and community organizers to public agencies, chambers of commerce, and more. But the big thing coming out of this effort was the recognition that carbon neutrality really can only be achieved if we're going about it in an equitable and inclusive approach. So what does that mean, tying it back to the data of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change? Well, you heard from our first presenter how society generally is contributing to climate change. The city of Sacramento is very similar. You can see in the pie chart more than half of local greenhouse gas emissions are caused by the transportation sector. The good news is we have made great strides as a community since 2005 towards our reduction targets. We've achieved a 19% reduction in community emissions, exceeding our 15% goal. We've also achieved a 28% reduction in municipal emissions. Now, this is significant, but it's still a long shot from carbon neutrality by 2045. And we've done a lot of the low-hanging fruit. What's left is the harder work that really takes more focus and effort on how we do this in a manner that brings our communities forward. So here's a quick snapshot of what this means in terms of targets and emissions. Very high level, you can see business as usual forecast tailing up towards the right of the chart in 2045. Where we are is the orange emissions line. We've exceeded that purple 2020 target you see about midway on the screen. But where we have to get to carbon neutral, that means really zero emissions or zero net emissions, as you can see in the bottom right of the screen. So how do we do that? Right now, our planning team is leading a really comprehensive update to the city's general plan, which includes updating the city climate action plan and preparing our first environmental justice element. Now, staff have been convening a stakeholder advisory group on this topic. We're in the process of developing even more materials to share. I'm showing on the screen just a snapshot of some of the data that we're pulling together to help understand these issues and challenges. There's real discrepancies in terms of opportunity, quality of life, and public investment across the city, which gets back to the issues highlighted earlier. It's how people can get around their communities if they have safe and affordable alternatives to car travel, if there's jobs or other amenities near where they live. And all of these issues come out and manifest themselves in various ways through environmental nature of the community, quality of the housing stock, and where we go as a community. So what we're really trying to do is to pull this together and to take a really holistic approach in not just addressing climate change, but this is really, how we envision and operate as a city. Excuse me. Now, also very exciting in a related effort, the city has committed to support the launch of an environmental justice collaborative governance committee, not to be confused with the climate commission effort, which recently completed. Also distinct from the outreach we're doing through the general plan, this will be a community-led effort with initial support in the form of city funding. A website was just launched. This is hot off the press. If this is a group you're interested to participate in, you can get more information online. This is an effort that will be facilitated by Climate Plan to pull together community members and representatives to really help envision and advise and build those partnerships and capacity to move together as a community and to work through these issues, because it's not just the planning, it's how we implement and achieve our goals. So with that, I will leave you with a few notes on upcoming council dates. On December 1st, the City Council is considering foundational general plan strategies and key topics for the Climate Action Plan, which is an opportunity for input. We're going back to City Council on December 8th to talk in a bit more detail on implementation. So check out the general plan website for more, and there is my email address. We've got a few city folks on the line, and we're also happy to follow up afterwards with Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Todd, both for presenting your respective climate action plan information. We're going to go now into the question and answer period. It's going to be moderated by Lori Heller of 350 Sacramento. So, Lori, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. If you have directed your question via the chat specifically to someone, then I'll have them answer those questions. If not, your questions will be answered by members of the environmental groups that are represented here. Barbara Leary, who's the chairperson of the Sacramento Sierra Club, Ralph Proper, who's the president of the Environmental Council of Sacramento, and Oscar Balagar from 350 Sacramento's CAP team. So the first question that we have is directed to Todd, and I believe Remy Mendoza is still with us from the city. Regarding housing, affordable and public housing, cooling centers during the summer, heating centers when it's freezing, and clean air centers when air quality is hazardous are all important parts to protect the vulnerable in our community. How is your CAP going to be addressing opening shelters and making sure that they're recalibrated for climate change and responsive to extreme heat, cold, and hazardous air? That's the first part of the question. So let's go to Todd first.
Thank you for that question. I can say one of the things that's identified already without the CAP, our Public Health Office and our Emergency Operations Center both have coordinated response to extreme heat events. There are already existing shelters or cooling centers that are opened up, and they have a process for doing that. As part of the climate action plan, I think what we need to do from a policy standpoint is make sure that we have a strong policy support to identify any gaps in that process that can potentially cause detrimental effects in some of the communities that we have in our environmental justice communities, or excuse me, environmental justice element. I think to the extent that we can identify additional funding needs and augment that program, that would go a long way. I don't know yet what that program will look like because we're still in draft form. As it relates to housing, we're currently working on the housing element update, and we know that there's a lot of overlap on some of these policy issues. The other thing that we're trying to tackle with the housing element is what we call opportunity areas, areas that could totally be beneficially used for increasing affordable housing, whether they're, and when I say affordable housing, I mean affordable to low-income populations and members of the community that need it the most. We also have our homeless initiatives director, which is not in planning, is also working on a shelter program, but I'm not fully up to speed on that just yet.
Thanks, Todd. Jennifer, go ahead.
Just really quickly from the city side, again, trying to look at this big picture perspective, certainly more work to do, but we can learn a lot from our successes with COVID, where we had a very integrated approach working with partners to respond to poor air quality days, hazardous air quality, getting water to our unhoused community, also working quickly to get people in housing. Through the general plan, the team is really working to streamline and essentially remove barriers to housing production to allow greater densities and a greater mix. That's a topic City Council will also be considering on December 1st. So trying to take an integrated approach. We will have more to do to think about this in terms of increasing frequency of hazardous events with climate change. That's an ongoing effort.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm going to direct to you the next question, and then it will go to Todd. The food ag sector also contributes to climate change in our community. How will the county CAP and the city CAP address with measurable reduction goals?
Yeah, two-part answer to that. Really understanding food access and food insecurity, that's really important to us from both policy and programmatic side. So it's not directly quantifiable in the climate action plan because the lens of the emissions of what we're looking at in the CAP is clipped to the geographic boundary of the city, whereas a lot of the emissions in our food production, that's getting at the life cycle of those emissions from outside city boundaries. So it's not a quantified strategy in the CAP, but it's a very important supportive strategy. And we have a number of partnerships and efforts underway to get people food, keep our restaurant industry working, and to get more urban ag happening to create local jobs, partnerships like Planting Justice and more. So thanks for the question. And thank you again, everyone. I'll be hopping off now, but thank you for that.
Thanks, Jennifer. Todd, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, I'll expand a little bit. We have a number of things going on in the agricultural and food space. As part of our environmental justice element, one of the programs that came out of it was a food system assessment, which is kind of that life cycle in the food arena of from the agricultural start, the production, into whether it's restaurants or grocery stores or schools or how does everybody get their food, and then what happens after that from the waste stream. So it's from the cradle to the grave, so to speak. We were able to partner with the Sacramento Food Policy Council and a number of other groups, nonprofit organizations, community benefit organizations. We recently got awarded, the collective group got awarded a federal grant to begin that food system assessment just last month. So we're in the very beginning stages of that. For Sacramento County, though, I agree with what Jennifer was saying about the geographic boundary. So ag is a piece of Sacramento County's inventory. It's only about, let me take a quick look. It's only about 5% of the county's inventory from an emissions standpoint. Transportation and energy are the two biggest major sectors from an emissions standpoint. As it relates to the climate action plan, one of the things we're going to be looking at is sequestration, and that's something that Tom's presentation hit on a little bit, because there are such vast acreages available in the external or the kind of the far out areas of Sacramento County. The ag opportunity for sequestration is really high. So we need to be able to work with the farmers, the Farm Bureau, and potentially in concert with the some of the programs that exist in the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation Plan to make sure that we can successfully do sequestration programs in partnership with the farmers.
Thank you, Todd. That's great. I have a question here for Oscar. The housing element and other goals, I'm sure, are never really met by the city or county. So how will climate change goals be held accountable? Is there a legal remedy? You're muted, Oscar.
That's a great question. I'm not sure I have a great answer. This city and county both have had problems in meeting their housing goals for low-income communities. I'm not sure how the CAP will directly address that. The CAP will, of course, low-income housing, the lack of low-income housing mostly affects, of course, low-income communities, and the equity issues that Todd mentioned. The equity direction of the CAP will be focused on those communities. But I think the question raises the need to examine that such issues in the CAP. What kind of policies do we need to help focus the CAP on housing shortfalls? And I would ask if anyone else on the panel has anything to add to that.
Yeah, this
Todd's hand is up.
is Rob Proper. I think we need to see more, as you say, affordable housing. The housing stock that has been increasing has tended to be single-family detached housing. We need more transit-oriented development, a commitment to public access to transit-oriented development. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. Anything to add, Barbara? You're muted.
Okay. One of the things that the CAP will be focusing on, in addition to having more transit-oriented housing, will be higher density of housing that will increase the number of units that can be placed along the transit corridors or near work centers, as well as reduce the costs and the impact on the actually the agricultural part of the environment. And it's a difficult balance to strike. There are programs in existence that are helping several of the cities in the region to build more affordable housing in those manners.
Thanks, Barbara. We have one more question, actually 1.5, and I'm going to direct this to Todd. Somebody has a question from Rancho Cordova, wants to know if the county CAP is going to include that or if they should take another route. But the main question for you is, what is the county going to do to increase energy efficiency and reduce the heat island effects in existing disadvantaged communities? So
Sure. I'll answer the first part, the Rancho Cordova piece first. Because the county does not have land use authority or jurisdiction in the city of Rancho Cordova or the city of Sacramento for that matter, the county's climate action plan would only be applicable to the unincorporated areas of the county. So if someone is looking for the city of Rancho Cordova to take some action related to climate, they would need to work through the city to do that. What was the second part? I'm sorry.
Second was increasing energy efficiency and reducing heat island effects in disadvantaged communities.
All right, so a couple of ways to respond to that. One is naturally through state legislation and changes in Title 24, statewide energy efficiency is being mandated on an increasing basis, typically on a 3-year cycle, give or take. So that gets built into the building code over time. So things like a certain percentage of electric vehicle charging in parking spaces in new development, that would be increasing over time. And from a disadvantaged community perspective, what we want to do is identify locations in disadvantaged communities, environmental justice communities, where the community has identified a need or a desire or the appropriate site for those types of facilities. And that the same is true for the tree plantings. One of the things that we have successfully done a number of times is partnered with the Sacramento Tree Foundation. They've got a great program called Neighborwoods. They've got a number of great programs, but that's the one that we can partner with to identify appropriate tree planting sites in disadvantaged communities, and that goes to the co-benefits. So when we plant a tree, or somebody plants a tree, or there's a large tree planting event, whether it's in a parking lot or along sidewalks, that provides shade, it provides cooling. It can help reduce energy costs, whether it's on private property or public property. The entire community can benefit from it.
Thanks.
So we see that as a co-benefit.
Great. I'm going to turn it back to Luis.
All right. Wow, that's great that we've had a lot of questions, and I'm thanking everyone. I know that this is an important topic, and it seems like there's a lot of ways that people can become involved. There's a lot of different areas to focus in on. And what we'll be doing is we'll be sending out information that was presented today, so to everybody that was registered, with the links, so that way you can become involved and also provide comments and suggestions. And if and then we'll also, I just wanted to hope that you stay engaged in the climate action plan development and process. So again, I want to thank everybody for your participation. Thank you for the presenters that provided valuable information, insight, and those individuals who made this presentation possible. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Thank you again. Bye now.